I still keep the faded plastic hospital wristband tucked in the back of my wooden storage box, buried underneath old high school yearbooks and cheap costume jewelry I outgrew years ago. The ink has mostly worn thin, smudged along the edges, but I can still make out fragments of my name and the date scrawled across its surface. That date pulls me straight back to the sterile, sharp smell of antiseptic, the hum of fluorescent ceiling lights, and the cold hard plastic of an emergency room waiting room chair where I sat alone when I was 14. It was the night my father left me behind. Now I am 28, renting a small one-bedroom apartment on the outer edge of Atlanta. I work a steady administrative office job, pay my own rent every month, handle my own insurance deductibles, and fix every problem that lands in my lap without calling anyone for help. Most days I move through my routine without digging up that old memory. It stays buried, quiet, locked away like something I do not want to disturb. But every time my father Ethan sends a text about holiday dinners or family get-togethers, the past creeps right back to the surface. Last Tuesday evening, his text lit up my phone screen while I heated up frozen dinner in my tiny kitchen. He wanted me at their house for Thanksgiving. Clara, my stepmother, had already started planning the menu, he wrote, and everyone expected me to show up. I leaned against the kitchen counter, staring at those words. For more than a decade, I have played the part of the agreeable adult daughter. I showed up to birthdays, sat through awkward holiday meals, smiled through clipped polite conversations, and swallowed every old hurt to keep the peace everyone else wanted. I told myself that time softens old wounds, that I should let the past rest, that rebuilding some version of family was worth swallowing my discomfort. But lately, pretending has grown heavier. My thumbs hovered over the screen, trying to draft a gentle excuse. Before I could send anything, another message popped up, this one from Clara. Her tone was perfectly calm on the surface, edged with quiet pressure. She said Ethan had worked hard to bring everyone together, that I owed it to the whole family to make an appearance, and that pulling away would only hurt my father's feelings. Reading it dragged my mind straight back to that night at the county hospital all those years ago. I was 14 then, and something had gotten broken in their suburban home. A decorative ceramic vase on the living room mantel had shattered across the hardwood floor. Clara immediately pointed her finger at me. She said I had knocked it over out of spite, that I was angry and reckless, that I could not be trusted inside their house. I tried to argue, told them I had not gone anywhere near that shelf, but no one listened. My father did not stop her accusations. He did not ask for my side of the story. He just grew quiet, jaw tight with frustration, worn out from the constant friction between Clara and me. Within an hour, he was driving me toward the hospital emergency room. At the time I thought he believed I was having some sort of emotional breakdown. I sat in the passenger seat, twisting the hem of my hoodie, too scared to speak. When we pulled into the hospital parking lot, he walked me through automatic glass doors to the ER check-in desk. He filled out intake forms, scribbled information onto printed paper, and fixed his gaze anywhere but on my face. I stood beside him, waiting for him to sit down beside me, waiting for us to wait for a doctor together. Instead, he mumbled that he would step outside for a minute. I watched his broad back turn away, heard the heavy click of the automatic doors as they swung shut behind him. He never came back inside. Time stretched on. Nurses hurried past with clipboards, patients coughed in nearby chairs, a television mounted high on the wall played a muted daytime talk show. I sat there for hours. Eventually a nurse named Marnie approached me. Her steps slowed when she saw I was by myself. No parent, no guardian anywhere in sight. She knelt down slightly so she could meet my eyes, her face etched with clear shock. She asked where my family had gone. I had no answer to give her. No phone number I could call. No way to reach the man who had driven me there. That night changed everything about how I saw safety and family. I shook myself out of the memory, back into my present-day apartment. My microwave beeped, signaling my food was ready, yet I had no appetite left. I typed out a short reply to Ethan, saying I was still unsure about Thanksgiving, that I needed time to think it over. Almost instantly his reply arrived. His message was sharp beneath its polite wording. He said I could not keep shutting them out forever. If I kept pulling away from the family, there would be consequences. He would not keep reaching out endlessly if I refused to participate. Those words landed like cold water. The threat hung plainly between the lines. Play the grateful daughter role, or risk losing whatever fragile family connection I still held. All the old pressure came crashing down on my shoulders again. For years I had buried that hospital night, telling myself I must have misremembered pieces of it, that maybe I had blown events out of proportion as a hurt teenager. But now, pushed into this corner once more, a new thought occurred to me. Hospitals keep medical records. Paperwork, intake notes, visitor logs. If those files still existed somewhere inside that county hospital system, they would hold the objective truth of what happened when I was 14. They would prove I had been left sitting in that ER all alone. My heart beat faster in my chest. I crossed the small living room and pulled open the top drawer of my storage box. My fingers brushed over worn notebooks until I found that old faded plastic wristband. I held it up under my lamp, staring at its faded print. For the first time in my adult life, I did not only feel grief. I felt a flicker of something else. A possibility. If I could get my hands on those old medical records, I would no longer have only my own memories to rely on. I set the wristband down carefully on my nightstand, and opened my web browser, starting to look up exactly how to request decades-old patient records from the county hospital system. I stared at the hospital website late that same night, scrolling through page after page of instructions for requesting old patient records. The county medical system's portal warned that records older than 15 years often required manual retrieval. Processing times could stretch out to 6 weeks, and there was no guarantee every document would still survive. I copied down the mailing address and printed form requirements, then closed my laptop and leaned back against the headboard of my bed. My thumb brushed the faded hospital wristband sitting on my nightstand. I knew sending in that request would not stay private for long. Sooner or later, Ethan or Clara would sense I was digging up the past. 3 days passed before Ethan called me. The phone rang while I was folding laundry on my living room couch. I hesitated before answering, already braced for the familiar heavy tone in his voice. He skipped small talk right away, pressing for a final answer about Thanksgiving. I told him honestly I had been thinking about that night at the ER when I was 14. My voice stayed steady. I was not shouting, I was not trying to pick a fight. I only wanted to know if he remembered how he had left me there alone. A long silence hummed over the phone line. Then he sighed, that tired, disappointed exhale I had heard so many times growing up. He said I was misremembering. He claimed he had only stepped outside to take an important work call, and he had fully intended to come back. According to his version, I had wandered off somewhere inside the hospital, and by the time he returned to the waiting room I was already gone. He said hospital staff must have moved me somewhere else, and years had warped my teenage memory. My chest tightened. That was not how it happened. I had sat glued to that plastic waiting room chair for hours. I had never moved. I told him that, and he cut me off. He said I kept clinging to hurt from so long ago, that I needed to let it go for everyone's sake. He did not want to rehash old teenage drama. Before I could push the conversation further, Clara's voice sounded faintly in the background of his call. She said something quiet that I could not quite make out. Ethan told me he had to hang up, and the line went dead. I sat there holding a dead phone in my hand, laundry scattered across the floor. The old hollow feeling settled deep inside my ribs. I had held a tiny, foolish hope that if I brought the memory up calmly, my father might meet me halfway. Instead he rewrote history completely. He had built a softer, far more convenient version of the past, one where he never abandoned his daughter. That weekend, messages started trickling in from distant aunts and cousins on my father's side. Several of them texted to say they hoped I would make it for Thanksgiving, and mentioned that Clara had told them I had been dwelling on painful, imagined memories from my youth. She was painting me as unstable, planting seeds with extended family before I even said a word to most of them. She was working to make sure if I ever spoke publicly about what happened, other relatives would already assume I was overreacting. I drove over to Jessie's apartment Sunday afternoon. We sat on her small balcony, drinking lukewarm iced tea. I told her every detail of the phone call with Ethan, and how Clara was already whispering to family behind the scenes. Jessie's jaw tightened. She told me to prepare myself. Even if the hospital did dig up those old files, our family would not accept them easily. Paper records would not make Ethan suddenly admit guilt. It might only make them fight harder to discredit me. I filled out the official medical records request form that evening. I printed it, signed it, made a copy of my state-issued ID, and slid everything into a manila envelope. The website noted there was a small processing fee I would need to pay once the staff located my files. I dropped the envelope in a blue postal mailbox on my commute to work Monday morning. After that, there was nothing left to do but wait. Days ticked by slowly. I checked my mailbox every single evening when I got home from the office. Late Wednesday night my phone lit up with a new text. It came directly from Clara. No casual greeting. Her message was crisp and sharp. She wrote that I needed to stop stirring up stories about things that never really happened. If I kept dragging up false old incidents, I would break what little family connection I still had left. She said I was choosing to destroy everything Ethan had tried so hard to build. I read those lines over twice. My fingers hovered over the reply box, but I did not write anything back. I set my phone face down on the coffee table. I understood clearly now. Gentle conversations would never fix this. They would not meet me halfway. Every soft attempt I made to talk honestly would be twisted against me. The peaceful reconciliation I had spent years quietly craving was never going to exist. The ground underneath everything had shifted permanently. I could not pretend anymore that simple politeness would heal these wounds. Clara's text lingered in my message thread for 3 full days. I never sent a reply. Every time I unlocked my phone and saw her name, my throat grew tight. I kept replaying Ethan's phone call in my head, the way he had rewritten that night so smoothly, as if my hours of terror had only been a confused teenage fantasy. I knew if I responded in anger, I would hand them exactly what they wanted, proof I was emotional, irrational, too sensitive to trust. So I stayed quiet and focused on waiting for word back from the hospital administration. Jessie kept checking in with me. She brought takeout to my apartment one weeknight and sat across from my kitchen table while I picked at cold noodles. She told me I owed nobody a peaceful holiday performance. Setting hard boundaries did not make me cruel, but she also warned me there would be real costs. Pushing back against Ethan and Clara would mean social friction with the rest of the family. Some people would pick their side, not mine. I thought long and hard about the Thanksgiving invitation. For over a decade I had shown up, forced smiles, eaten overcooked turkey, and pretended we were some normal happy household. This year I could not do it. I typed a short, clear message to Ethan. I told him I would not attend their Thanksgiving dinner. I explained I still wanted space to process old family hurt, and I was not ready to sit at their dinner table making small talk as if nothing had ever gone wrong. I hit send, and my hands shook a little. His reply arrived within minutes. He was furious. He wrote that I was punishing the whole household for events from so long ago. Clara added her own comment in the same text thread, saying I was selfish and ungrateful after everything my father had given me growing up. They both acted as if refusing one holiday meal was a huge betrayal. Later that evening, my aunt left a voicemail on my cell, telling me I needed to get over myself and stop hurting my dad. The pressure from the family circle closed in fast. I kept my resolve. I would not back down this time. I had mailed in my medical records request, and now I began mentally preparing for what would come next. If the hospital found my intake paperwork, those documents would hold the timestamp of Ethan's signature, and the notes nurses wrote about a 14-year-old girl left alone in the waiting room. That paper would be objective, outside of anyone's biased memory. 2 weeks after I mailed my envelope, a thin white official envelope arrived in my mailbox. My heart jumped when I spotted the hospital system return address. I tore it open, standing right there on my apartment building sidewalk. It was not the full set of medical files. It was only a formal notice. Hospital staff had located portions of my old ER chart from that night. Some older backup digital archives had survived. However, certain handwritten nurse shift notes had not been located yet. They advised me that partial copies would be mailed to my home address within 10 business days. I leaned against the concrete railing outside my building, breathing slow. Part of the records existed. Proof was out there somewhere. But the critical notes from Nurse Marnie Hale were still missing. Without her first-hand written observation, the paperwork would show Ethan had checked me in. But it would not explicitly state he walked out and abandoned me. When I got back inside my apartment, I texted Jessie the news. She wrote back that this was real progress, but also a trap. Partial evidence could be twisted. Ethan and Clara could pick apart whatever documents arrived, and poke holes in what was missing. She urged me not to rush to show them anything until I held as much complete information as possible. I understood her warning, yet hope flickered inside me anyway. Maybe when Ethan saw the official hospital forms, he would finally stop lying to himself. Maybe paper evidence would crack through the version of history he had built. That quiet hope was still alive inside me, even after everything. I set the hospital notice on my kitchen counter, and waited for the second envelope to arrive. I knew once those printed records landed in my hands, there would be no turning back. The fragile pretense of our family dynamic was already crumbling, and soon there would be nowhere left to hide from the truth. The second envelope from the hospital showed up 9 days later. I came home from work and found it propped against my front door. I tore the seal open the second I stepped inside, sinking down onto my entryway floor, spreading out printed sheets across the hardwood. Pages of faded, scanned hospital forms stared back at me. I flipped through them one by one. There was Ethan's handwriting on the intake form, messy and familiar. He had filled in basic information about me, listed vague emotional distress as the reason for the ER visit. The timestamp showed he completed the paperwork at 8:17 p.m. Further down the chart, a general nurse's log noted a minor-aged patient present without guardian supervision starting around 9:04 p.m. But nowhere in these printed pages was Marnie Hale's specific first-hand account. Her handwritten shift notes were still missing from what the hospital had pulled. The records confirmed I was left unsupervised, yet they did not lay out the full story in sharp, unarguable detail. A risky idea bloomed in my mind. Part of me thought if I showed these scanned copies directly to Ethan, face to face, he would finally have to accept reality. He could not dismiss official hospital paperwork as my warped teenage imagination. I ignored Jessie's earlier warning about moving too fast. I texted Ethan and asked if I could stop by his house for a short private visit, no Clara present. I told him I wanted to go over something important from my past. To my surprise, he agreed. I arrived at the familiar suburban house on a quiet Saturday afternoon. The front yard still had the same overgrown oak tree I used to climb as a small kid. The interior smelled like cinnamon candles, Clara's signature scent. Ethan met me in the living room. I laid the printed hospital copies on the coffee table between us. I pointed out his signature, the timestamps, the note about an unsupervised minor in the ER waiting room. I told him these were official hospital documents. I asked him again to acknowledge what he had done that night when I was 14. His face hardened. He picked up the papers, scanned them quickly, then set them down. He did not break. He said forms could be misinterpreted. Hospital staff wrote messy, incomplete notes all the time. Before I could press him further, Clara stepped out from the hallway. She had been listening just out of sight the whole time. She walked over and picked up the printouts, flipping through them with cold amusement. She told Ethan this was exactly what she had feared. She said my trauma had warped my perception of reality, and I was grasping at old hospital paperwork to manufacture false accusations against my own father. By the time I drove back to my apartment that evening, Ethan was already forwarding screenshots of those hospital documents to several family members. He framed the files as proof I was fixated on old pain, spiraling emotionally. If family texts blew up my phone. Relatives I barely spoke to sent concerned, judgmental messages. Most sided with Ethan and Clara. They said I needed therapy, that I should drop this subject. I felt isolated, cut off. I had believed tangible paper records would win people over. Instead, they were weaponized against me. My misjudgment had made everything worse. Late that night, I dug through the bottom of my old storage box, searching through childhood keepsakes. Under stacks of old photographs, I found the original thin plastic hospital wristband again. I twisted it between my fingers under my desk lamp. Nurse Marnie Hale was the only living witness who had seen me sitting alone in that ER room. If I could find her, if she still remembered that night, her first-hand memory could fill all the gaps left by incomplete hospital files. I opened my laptop and began searching. I looked through state nursing licensing databases, old social media profiles, public employee records. I had no idea if she still lived in Georgia, if she was still working in medicine, or if she even remembered that scared 14-year-old girl from decades ago. There was no guarantee I would ever track her down. But at that moment, she felt like my only real remaining chance. Searching for Marnie Hale ate up most of my free evenings over the next 2 weeks. I sifted through public licensing records, cross-referenced maiden and married names, scrolled old social media profiles. Many people shared that same common name. Most profiles I pulled up were not her. More than once I thought I had a solid lead, only to discover I was looking at a complete stranger. Some nights I closed my laptop feeling defeated, convinced I would never locate the nurse who had knelt down to talk to me in that ER waiting room. Then one Tuesday night, I found it. A Georgia state nursing license directory listed Marnie Hale, still active, working at a smaller community hospital about 45 minutes outside Atlanta. A professional profile link showed her photograph. The woman in the image had the same kind, tired eyes I remembered from that terrible night. My hands froze over my keyboard. After all these years, I had actually found her. I hesitated for 2 full days before sending a short, careful message through the professional contact form on her hospital staff page. I told her I was searching for a nurse who had worked county ER shifts many years ago. I briefly explained I was the 14-year-old girl left abandoned in the waiting room decades earlier. I said I only wanted to ask if she still held any memory of that night. I gave my cell phone number, and hit send. I tried not to stare at my phone every minute, but waiting felt unbearable. 48 hours later my phone vibrated with an unknown number. I answered, and a calm female voice came over the line. It was Marnie. She remembered me. She remembered that evening clearly. She told me she had never forgotten finding a quiet, terrified teen sitting alone for hours with no guardian anywhere to be found. She recalled filling out supplementary shift notes, writing about how my father had completed intake then vanished without a forwarding phone number. Those handwritten notes were exactly the documents the county hospital had failed to locate in their archived system. Talking to her brought a strange mixture of relief and sharp grief. For the first time since I was 14, someone outside my own head could confirm I had not imagined what happened. Marnie told me she would write down everything she could recall, and email me a detailed personal witness statement. She warned me she could not give legal testimony, but she was willing to put her first-hand memory into writing for me. Right as our phone call ended, Ethan sent me a grim text message. He had heard from other family members I was digging up old witnesses and hospital paperwork. He told me if I kept pursuing this painful history, he would formally remove me from any future inheritance. Any money or property he might leave behind would go entirely to Clara's side of the family. It was a blunt, financial threat, trying to scare me into backing down. I sat on my couch processing that new blow. I had never counted on inheriting anything from him, but the threat drove home how far they would go to shut me up. They would use money and family legacy as leverage to make me bury the truth again. Somehow, word of my conversation with Marnie leaked to Clara. I never learned which relative passed along the news. That night I received a furious text from her. Her message was ice cold. She wrote that I had crossed a line by tracking down a former hospital employee to dig up ancient history. She accused me of harassing strangers to manufacture lies against my own family. I read her words, and understood something critical. Clara was scared. She was not annoyed anymore. She was genuinely afraid of what Marnie's witness account could expose. The weight of everything crashed over me in the weeks that followed. Work grew stressful, my boss piled extra administrative tasks onto my desk, and every evening I came home to deal with fallout from my family. Relatives avoided my calls. Some unfollowed my social media accounts. Holiday season social posts from Ethan and Clara showed smiling group photos at neighborhood gatherings, carefully edited to give the impression of a perfectly harmonious household. I was erased entirely from their public family image, Marnie emailed over her written witness statement. I read it late one night, sitting under my desk lamp. Every detail matched my own memory. She described my quiet, shaken posture, the empty waiting room chairs around me, the complete absence of any parent or guardian. Reading her words brought validation, but also reopened old wounds. Reliving that night over and over drained my mental energy. Jessie noticed how worn down I had become. She stopped by my apartment one rainy Thursday evening. She saw the dark circles under my eyes, the stack of printed hospital papers spread across my dining room table. She told me I did not owe this fight to anybody. I could walk away, drop the whole thing, stop hurting myself digging up old trauma. For a moment I seriously considered it. Giving up would end all the current conflict. But I knew if I backed down now, I would carry this unresolved weight for the rest of my life. The worst part surprised me. Even after everything Ethan had done, part of me still grieved for the loving father I had wished to have. Some small, stubborn piece of me still craved his recognition, still secretly wanted him to feel remorse, to apologize honestly, to see how deeply he had hurt me as a child. That quiet longing lingered, even when my rational mind knew it was unrealistic. That inner conflict wore me down more than any family argument. Ethan and Clara acted as if they had already won. They sent occasional passive-aggressive messages, reminding me I could still come back if I would drop all my accusations and behave as a dutiful daughter. They believed time and social pressure would eventually force me to surrender. One night I pulled out a box of old teenage belongings. I held a worn childhood photograph of myself at 13, before the hospital night. I sat on my apartment floor and cried. I grieved for the kid I had been, left alone in that cold ER waiting room. I grieved for the family I would never get to have. In that low, exhausted moment, something shifted inside of me. I finally let go of the dream of a warm, reconciled relationship with my father. I stopped waiting for him to magically turn into the caring parent I had always wanted. I was not fighting to win his love anymore. I was fighting only for the truth to be acknowledged. For myself. I pulled out a notebook, opened it to a blank page, and started writing. I outlined every single event, step by step. Clara's false accusation about the broken vase, Ethan driving me to the ER, him signing intake papers and walking away, Marnie finding me alone, the hospital records, the witness statement. I wrote down exactly what I intended to say during a face-to-face meeting with Ethan and Clara. I would not scream. I would not throw tantrums. I would lay out facts plainly and calmly. I needed one final, direct conversation, no more text messages, no more secondhand family gossip. I needed to say all of this out loud to their faces. I spent 3 days refining what I planned to say. I read over Marnie's witness statement repeatedly, tabbed the key pages of my partial hospital records. I wanted every point grounded in real evidence, not just raw emotion. I refused to walk into their private suburban house. I would not give them the home field advantage to manipulate the conversation. Instead, I proposed meeting at a quiet neutral coffee shop, a large chain location with plenty of other customers around, open during daytime hours. Public space would keep them from blowing up or twisting the moment behind closed doors. I texted Ethan the meeting proposal. I told him I wanted one calm, honest conversation, no extended family members invited. I said I would bring documentation, and I only wanted him to listen without interrupting. After a full day of silence, he wrote back agreeing. He said he would show up at 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. He made no mention of Clara. I assumed she would stay home. The night before our meeting I barely slept. I laid out printed copies of all my paperwork inside a plain folder. I double-checked my bag, made sure my phone was fully charged. Jessie told me to text her the exact coffee shop address, and promised to keep her phone handy in case I needed anything. She warned me not to expect a heartfelt apology. Even with documents and a witness, Ethan might still refuse genuine accountability. I kept her warning in my head, yet nerves hummed through my whole body. Saturday afternoon arrived. I drove 25 minutes to the coffee shop. I got there 10 minutes early, picked a back corner booth. Sunlight filtered through big front windows. Other patrons chatted softly at nearby tables. The espresso machine hissed behind the counter. I set my folder flat on the tabletop in front of me, and waited. Ethan walked through the glass front door right at 2 o'clock. He wore the same faded work jacket I remembered from my teenage years. He scanned the room, spotted me, and began walking toward my booth. Then I saw her. Clara stepped in through the doorway right behind him. She had come along, uninvited. Her expression was cool, composed, her purse slung over one shoulder. She had ignored every condition of my arranged neutral meeting. My heart sank. I had wanted to speak one-on-one with my father. Clara's presence meant she would hijack the conversation, deflect blame, perform victimhood for Ethan's benefit. There was no way to reschedule now. If I stood up and left immediately, they would claim I was too afraid to talk, that my accusations held no weight. I took a slow deep breath. I was already here. All my preparation sat inside that folder on the table. I could not turn around and walk away without speaking my truth. Ethan slid into one side of the booth. Clara sat directly across from me. She set her purse down loudly on the table surface. She spoke first, before I could open my mouth. She said she hoped I was finally ready to let go of these invented old grievances. Her tone was smooth, practiced, designed to make me look unreasonable to anyone who might overhear. I rested my hand on top of my folder. I knew this meeting would not bring peaceful closure, but this was the moment I would lay every piece of my evidence out in front of both of them. There was no going back from here. The background noise of the coffee shop wrapped around us, clinking mugs, distant chatter, the low whir of coffee equipment. I sat across the booth from Ethan and Clara, my folder of printed documents resting between our drinks. Clara leaned back in her seat, her posture relaxed, like she was sitting through some trivial casual catch-up. Not a reckoning over childhood abandonment. She opened immediately, speaking over me before I could begin. She said this whole situation was painful for Ethan. She painted me as a bitter adult who could not get over teenage growing pains. She said I was wasting everyone's time digging up events that had long been put in the past. Her voice stayed moderate, quiet, perfect for a public setting. Any nearby stranger glancing over would assume I was the unreasonable party picking on an innocent older couple. I waited for her to finish talking. I did not raise my voice. When she paused for breath, I pulled out the hospital intake printouts and Marnie's witness statement, and laid them flat across the table. I told them I was not here to argue about feelings. I was here to lay out facts. I walked step by step through that night. I described the broken vase, Clara blaming me without proof, Ethan driving me to the county ER. I pointed to Ethan's signature timestamped on the intake paperwork. Then I read short key excerpts from Marnie's written account, describing finding a 14-year-old girl left all alone in the waiting room chairs. Clara's calm mask slipped for a split second. Her jaw tightened. She tried to argue that a nurse's memory from decades ago could not be trusted. She said hospital notes were unreliable. But Ethan had gone quiet. He stared down at the papers spread on the table. His shoulders slumped. For years he had hidden behind denial, but sitting here with physical proof in front of him, he could not keep pretending none of it had happened. He could not keep hiding behind Clara's arguments. Other customers moved around in the background. No one paid close attention to our booth, yet the public setting kept Clara from exploding into full-blown rage. She tried several different angles. She said I was twisting small moments to manufacture harm. She brought up times they had paid for my groceries years later, trying to frame those small favors as repayment for everything that had happened. She talked about how stressful life had been for her after marrying Ethan, how difficult it was raising a troubled teen stepdaughter. In those moments her true self-centered motivation peeked through. She had always seen me as a burden disrupting her marriage. Gradually, Ethan stopped letting Clara speak for him. He sat silently for a long stretch, staring at the table surface. The confident, defensive energy he had carried for years drained away. Lines in his face looked deeper. He rubbed one hand over his forehead. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. He did not deny leaving me at the hospital anymore. He admitted he had walked out of those ER automatic doors that night. But then he shifted nearly all the blame onto Clara. He said he had only done it because she had pushed him past his breaking point, because she had convinced him I was out of control. He framed himself as another person trapped by her pressure. I sat there absorbing his partial admission. He could no longer lie about the core event. Yet he still refused to take ownership of his own choice. He had been the adult. He had been my father. No amount of pressure from his wife erased the fact he had driven me there, filled out those forms, and abandoned a scared 14-year-old kid inside a hospital waiting room. He wanted to admit the action, but hand all moral responsibility over to someone else. Clara's face turned cold when Ethan shifted blame toward her. She shot him a sharp, angry look. The united front they had maintained for so many years cracked open right in front of me. Their carefully polished family image was splintering apart. I had forced the truth out into the open, but real accountability was still incomplete. The coffee shop air felt heavier after Ethan's partial confession. Steam curled upward from our half-cooled drinks. Clara's polite public persona had fully fractured. She shot Ethan bitter glances, furious that he had stopped lying for her sake. I sat upright in the booth, keeping my tone steady, refusing to let the conversation slide into a he-said-she-said fight between the two of them. I told Ethan plainly that blaming Clara entirely would not work. No one had forced him to walk out of that ER. He was a grown man. He held the choice that night. He could have stayed with me. He could have called another family member. He could have arranged alternate help. Instead, he had left his minor child behind in a busy emergency room, and he had spent more than 14 years rewriting that memory to avoid his own guilt. Clara cut in, voice sharp. She went back to the broken vase. She insisted I definitely had knocked it over. She said my attitude as a teenager had been impossible to live with. She painted herself as the long-suffering victim stuck dealing with a difficult stepchild. I told her the truth of whether I broke that vase no longer mattered. Even if I had shattered that ceramic decoration, abandoning a 14-year-old girl in a hospital was wildly out of proportion to any household accident. That was the core failure, not the vase itself. I tapped my finger lightly against Marnie's witness statement spread across the table. I reminded them a neutral third-party witness remembered every detail of that night. Hospital intake records confirmed Ethan's presence and departure. I was not operating only off my own old memories. Hard evidence backed my account. Ethan's eyes looked glassy. He appeared overwhelmed, torn between guilt, loyalty to his wife, and the weight of decades of buried secrets. He tried to say he had felt overwhelmed back then, stressed from work, pulled between household tensions. He said he had made a terrible mistake he tried not to think about. But he still could not offer a full, unreserved apology. He kept circling back to how hard everything had been for him. Clara stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse off the table. She said there was no point continuing this conversation. She accused me of destroying the whole family for old history. She would not acknowledge any fault of her own. She turned and walked quickly toward the coffee shop exit, the bell above the doorway jingling as she stormed outside to wait in their car in the parking lot. Only Ethan and I remained in the booth. The fight was drained out of him. He sat slouched, staring at the scattered printed papers. I told him exactly what I needed. I did not demand money. I did not demand they cut Clara out of their marriage. I only asked for one honest thing. I wanted him to stop rewriting the past. Stop telling relatives I made up stories. Stop pretending that night never happened. He did not have to repair our relationship, but he owed me the dignity of not lying about my childhood trauma to other people. He did not give me a clean yes or no. He said he needed time to process everything. He was shaken, caught between the truth sitting in front of him and the life he had built with Clara. I understood I would not get a satisfying, tearful reconciliation in this coffee shop. That happy ending had never existed. I gathered my printed documents back into my folder, closed it shut. I told him I had nothing more to say for now. I slid out of the booth. I walked past other coffee shop patrons, pushed open the glass front door, and stepped out into bright afternoon sunlight. Behind me, the old family dynamic I had grown up inside lay shattered. The lies they had lived with for years could not be put back together again. There would be no magical healing between us. The chapter of me chasing validation from my father was finished.